If someone had told me a few months ago that my marriage was heading for disaster, I wouldn't have believed them. If they had suggested that my wife, Danielle, was capable of something as cruel as betrayal, I would have laughed in their face. We had been together for 8 years, married for 5, and in that time I had never once doubted her. I had built my entire life around the idea that she was my partner, my best friend, the person I could trust above all else. And yet here I am, sitting alone in our apartment, staring at the mess of my life unraveling before me, wondering how I could have been so blind. The worst part? It all started with something as small as a silk scarf. I had never been the jealous type. I didn't snoop through her phone, didn't question her when she said she was going out with friends, didn't make a big deal out of the little things. Maybe that was my mistake, trusting too easily, assuming that because I was faithful, she would be too. But looking back, I can see the warning signs. They weren't big, obvious red flags, but small, subtle shifts in her behavior that I had brushed off as nothing. She started spending more time at the gym, which I initially thought was great. She had always been active, but suddenly she was obsessed, going 5 or 6 times a week, staying longer than usual, even going on weekends when she had never done that before. I figured she just wanted to focus on herself, and I supported it. I didn't question why she suddenly cared so much about working out, about getting in shape in a way she never had before. Then there were the late nights. She started coming home later, claiming she had gone out for post-workout smoothies with her gym friends, people I had never heard of, names she had never mentioned before. When I asked why she never invited me, she laughed and said, "You'd hate it. We just talk about fitness stuff." And that was that. I didn't push, didn't question. Why would I? It wasn't like she had ever given me a reason to. But something felt off. The way she avoided my eyes when she spoke, the way she suddenly cared so much about what she wore to the gym, how she had started buying expensive leggings and sports bras from brands she never used to care about. And then there was her phone, always in her hand, always tilted away from me, notifications swiped away before I could even glance at them. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was like a slow-moving storm, the kind you see forming in the distance but convince yourself will pass without hitting you. And I let it slide, let it build, ignored the gut feeling that told me my wife was keeping something from me. Until that day at the gym. Until the moment I found that scarf, that damn scarf, and realized that everything I thought I knew was a lie. It happened on a Monday evening, one of those days where everything felt normal, where I was still living in the illusion that my marriage was intact. I had left work early and decided to surprise Danielle at the gym, something I had never done before. It wasn't out of suspicion, not at first. I had just wanted to see her, maybe suggest grabbing dinner together afterward, do something spontaneous. I told myself that it was just a small way to reconnect, to remind her that I was still here, still paying attention. But the moment I stepped inside that building, the moment I caught the faint trace of something unusual in the air, everything shifted. The gym was nearly empty, the usual post-work rush still an hour away, and the locker room was silent except for the occasional clang of weights from the next room over. I walked past the rows of lockers, heading toward the front desk, when something caught my eye, a silk scarf draped carelessly over the bench near one of the open lockers. It was red, delicate, the kind of thing that didn't belong in a gym full of sweat-drenched towels and worn-out sneakers. I wouldn't have thought anything of it except for one detail, the scent. It was a perfume I didn't recognize, something floral, heavy, lingering in the air like a warning. Danielle never wore perfume to the gym, had even complained about women who did, saying it mixed weirdly with sweat and made everything smell worse. And yet, there it was, this unmistakable, intoxicating scent clinging to a scarf that looked far too expensive to be tossed aside like an afterthought. Something about it made my stomach twist. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that it probably belonged to some random woman who had forgotten it. But then I saw the initials stitched into the corner, DK Danielle Kane. My wife's initials, clear as day, embroidered in the fabric like a signature on a confession. I reached out, hesitating for just a second before picking it up, the silk smooth between my fingers, the scent clinging to my skin as if it were marking me with a truth I wasn't ready to face. I turned it over, looking for any explanation, any clue that would make this all make sense, and that's when I noticed it, the faintest smudge of lipstick, barely there, but unmistakable. The color was deep, a shade Danielle didn't own, didn't wear. I felt something shift inside me, something dark and unsteady. This wasn't right. Danielle had left for the gym in a rush that morning, wearing her usual leggings and tank top, no makeup, no perfume. She had kissed me goodbye like she always did, her lips bare, her scent familiar. But now here was the scarf, drenched in a fragrance I had never smelled on her before, stained with lipstick that wasn't hers. My first thought was denial. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a gift from a friend, maybe she had borrowed it from someone, maybe I was being ridiculous. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't just some misplaced piece of fabric. This was evidence, a small, careless mistake that told me my wife was keeping secrets. My pulse pounded in my ears as I looked around the empty locker room, half expecting someone to walk in, to catch me standing there like some pathetic fool holding his wife's silk scarf like it held the answers to everything. I didn't know what to do next. I should have left, should have gone home and waited for her, should have confronted her the moment she walked through the door. But instead I stayed. I placed the scarf back exactly where I had found it and took a step back, forcing myself to breathe, to think. If she was cheating, if she was lying to me, then she wouldn't expect me to find out like this. She thought she was being careful, thought she had hidden it well. But the scarf proved otherwise. It meant there were cracks in her deception, small ones, but enough for me to slip through. And for the first time, I realized that I didn't want to confront her blindly. I wanted to know the whole truth before I let her see that I had found out. I wanted to see just how deep this betrayal went before I gave her the chance to spin it into something that wasn't her fault. So, instead of going home, instead of waiting for Danielle to feed me more lies, I did something I never thought I would do. I stayed at the gym. I waited. I watched. And when she finally showed up, when I saw the way she moved, the way she smiled at the man standing too close to her, the way her fingers brushed against his arm as they laughed about something I wasn't supposed to hear, I knew. I knew that my wife was cheating on me. And I knew that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. Sitting in my car outside our apartment that night, I felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into something dark and endless. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white, my mind still replaying the scene at the gym over and over again, refusing to let me breathe. I had stayed long enough to see Danielle walk in, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, her body language loose, easy, comfortable. She wasn't tense, wasn't guarded, wasn't the distant, distracted version of herself I had been living with. No, she was something else entirely. And then there was the man, tall, fit, the kind of guy who looked like he lived in the gym, his confidence radiating in a way that made my stomach churn. She had walked up to him without hesitation, her hand grazing his arm as they laughed at something, the kind of laughter that wasn't meant to be shared with just anyone. It was intimate, familiar, full of unspoken words that didn't belong to a casual friendship. And the worst part? She didn't look like she was sneaking around. She didn't glance over her shoulder, didn't check to see if anyone was watching, didn't act like a woman carrying a secret. She looked like she belonged there, like this was her real life, the one she had chosen when she thought I wasn't looking. I could have walked in right then and there, could have called out her name and watched her face fall as she realized the game was up. But I didn't. Because I wanted to see how far it would go, how comfortable she really was in this world she had built without me. I waited, watched as she leaned against the counter near the juice bar, as the man slid his hand across her lower back in a touch so casual, so rehearsed, that it made my blood turn to ice. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She leaned into it, let him touch her like it was nothing, like it was normal. And that was the moment I knew there was nothing left to salvage. She wasn't just lying to me. She had replaced me. By the time I got home, I had gone past anger. I had gone past sadness. What was left was something else entirely, something colder, something more final. I sat in that car for what felt like hours, waiting for her to come home, waiting for the moment I would finally face the woman I had built my life around and demand to know just how long she had been making a fool out of me. When she finally walked through the door, she looked surprised to see me sitting in the living room, as if my presence in my own home was somehow unexpected. She was still in her gym clothes, her hair tied up in that effortless way she always did, her phone in her hand, fingers tapping quickly across the screen before she looked up at me. And in that moment, I saw it, the flicker of something in her eyes, something sharp, something calculating. She knew. Maybe she didn't know how much I knew, but she knew something was different. Knew that I wasn't just sitting there waiting to ask how her workout had gone. I didn't play games. I didn't dance around it. I laid the scarf on the coffee table between us, the perfume still clinging to it, the faint smudge of lipstick catching the light. I watched as her expression shifted, as she tilted her head slightly, already crafting a response, already trying to figure out how to turn this around before I even had the chance to speak. And then she did what she always did when she was cornered. She laughed. A dry, dismissive chuckle, like I was being ridiculous. Like this entire situation was beneath her. She picked up the scarf, turning it over in her hands like it was the first time she had ever seen it, her mouth curving into a smirk that made my skin crawl. She told me it wasn't what I thought. She said she had borrowed it from a friend, that I was making something out of nothing. She acted like the idea of her cheating was absurd, like the very thought of it was so outlandish that I should be embarrassed for even bringing it up. And when I didn't respond, when I just sat there, watching her spin her web of lies with the same ease she had probably used 100 times before, she rolled her eyes and told me I was being paranoid. But then I told her I had been at the gym. I told her I had seen him. I told her I had watched the way she touched him, the way she let him touch her, the way she had laughed with him in a way that she hadn't laughed with me in months. And that was when the real Danielle showed up. The one who didn't care about keeping up appearances anymore. The one who was done pretending to be the perfect wife. The smirk faded, her posture stiffened, and for the first time, I saw something close to real emotion flicker across her face. Not guilt, not remorse, just annoyance. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. She just sighed, ran a hand through her hair, and asked me what I wanted her to say, as if the truth was some inconvenience she had to deal with before moving on with her night. As if I was wasting her time. And that was it. That was the moment I realized there was no point in asking for answers. There was no point in demanding to know how long it had been going on, or why she had done it, or whether she had ever actually loved me. Because none of it would have mattered. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't the woman I thought I had married. She was a stranger, standing in my living room, looking at me like I was the obstacle in her life. And that was when I knew I was done. There was no fixing this. There was no coming back from this. She had already left me a long time ago. I was just now catching up. I stood up, my chest tight, my breath unsteady, and I told her I wanted her gone. No screaming, no accusations, no begging for an explanation. Just 3 simple words that left no room for debate. She blinked at me, as if she hadn't expected it to be that easy. As if she had thought there would be some fight, some dramatic scene where she could play the victim. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. I didn't give her anything. I just walked past her, heading for the bedroom, because I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I don't know how long she stood there after that, but eventually, I heard the front door close behind her. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to feel something. Anger, relief, grief. But all I felt was empty, like the life I had spent years building had been erased in an instant, like everything I had known had been rewritten into something I no longer recognized. And the worst part? I didn't even know where to begin picking up the pieces. The first few nights after she left felt like I was living inside someone else's life, like I was wandering through a version of my own existence that had been shattered and left for me to piece back together. The apartment felt different, even though nothing had physically changed. It was quieter, but not in the peaceful way I had once craved after a long day at work. It was an absence, an emptiness that filled every corner, reminding me that she had been there, that we had built something in this space, and now she was gone. I wasn't sure whether I hated it or found relief in it. Maybe both. The weight of what had happened pressed down on me at odd times, when I poured my morning coffee and instinctively grabbed 2 cups before remembering I only needed one, when I caught a glimpse of the couch and saw the faint imprint of where she used to sit, when I reached for my phone and had to remind myself that I had no reason to check if she had called. There was no part of my daily routine that hadn't been touched by her betrayal, no habit that didn't remind me of the fact that she had been living a double life while I had been existing in ignorance. At first, the anger was the only thing keeping me upright. It burned inside me, a relentless fire that refused to die down, fueling me through the sleepless nights and the quiet mornings where I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. I thought about every lie she had told, every moment I had trusted her while she had been laughing behind my back, letting another man touch her the way only I should have. I thought about the way she had stood in our living room, unfazed, barely reacting as I told her to leave, as if the life we had built together was just something she could shrug off and walk away from without so much as a second thought. That hurt more than the cheating itself. The realization that she had been ready for this moment long before I had. That she had already disconnected from our marriage. That she had been living as if I didn't exist for months before I had even begun to suspect. I had spent so much time trying to be a good husband, trying to give her space, trying to support her when she started spending more time at the gym, never once questioning if I was supporting something that had nothing to do with me. And that made me sick. The thought that I had been actively making it easier for her to betray me, that I had been encouraging her to take more time for herself while she was using that time to be with him, was like a slow poison creeping through my veins. But then, after the anger had burned through me for a few days, it left something else behind: grief. The kind of grief that didn't hit all at once but instead crept in slowly, settling in the quiet moments when I least expected it. I didn't miss her, not anymore. I had seen her for what she truly was, had watched her lie to my face without a flicker of guilt, and I knew there was no going back. But I missed the idea of her. I missed the version of her that I had thought was real, the woman I had spent years loving, the person I had believed had my back no matter what. That was what hurt the most, the realization that I had been in love with someone who had never truly existed. She had played the part well, had smiled at me, kissed me, told me she loved me while she was busy building a separate life, one where I didn't matter. And now I had to mourn that. I had to mourn the life I thought I had, the future I had imagined, the certainty I had once felt that no matter what, she was my person. The nights were the hardest. That was when my mind wandered, replaying old memories that now felt like they belonged to someone else. I would remember a vacation we had taken 2 years ago, the way she had held my hand as we walked through unfamiliar streets, laughing at something silly, her eyes lighting up in a way that had once made me feel invincible. And now that memory felt fake, tainted by the knowledge that she had been capable of so much deception. I wondered when it had started, if there had been a moment, a single decision where she had chosen to betray me, or if it had been something that had built slowly, layer by layer, until she had convinced herself that she deserved this secret life she had created. And no matter how many times I turned it over in my head, I would never know. That was another part of the grief, knowing that there would always be unanswered questions, that there was no closure coming, no explanation that would make this make sense. I wanted to hate her, to let that be the final emotion that defined this chapter of my life, but the truth was, I didn't. I didn't just hate her, pitied her. I pitied the kind of person who could throw away a marriage without a second thought, who could stand in front of someone who had loved them and feel nothing but irritation at being caught. I pitied the way she had convinced herself that she was entitled to more, that loyalty and honesty were disposable, that the excitement of something new was worth more than the foundation we had built. And maybe someday she would look back and realize what she had done. Maybe she would feel the weight of her own actions, maybe she would regret. But that wasn't my problem anymore. My problem was myself. My problem was figuring out how to move forward, how to stop seeing my entire life as before the betrayal and after the betrayal. My problem was learning how to be alone again, how to trust myself after being blindsided so completely, how to wake up each day without feeling like there was a shadow of something unfinished hanging over me. The worst part about betrayal isn't the moment you discover it. It's everything that comes after. It's the way it changes you, rewires you, makes you doubt yourself in ways you never did before. It's knowing that no matter how much time passes, a part of you will always carry the scars of it, will always hesitate before trusting again, will always wonder if the next person will be just as capable of smiling while they lie. And that was what I had to deal with now. Not her. Not them. But me. My own rebuilding, my own healing, my own process of learning how to be someone who wasn't defined by the worst thing that had ever happened to him. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know what the future looked like, what kind of man I would become on the other side of this. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let this break me. She had already taken enough from me. She had taken my trust, my time, my belief in her. I refused to let her take my future too. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step forward. The days blurred together after she left, each one feeling like a long, drawn-out reminder of what had happened, like I was living in the aftermath of a disaster that had torn through my life and left only the wreckage behind. At first, I kept expecting to wake up and feel something different, something lighter, as if the weight of her betrayal would eventually start to fade. But it didn't. It settled into my bones, into the very structure of my life, like a foundation that had cracked beneath me, and no matter how much I wanted to shake it off, it was always there. The anger came in waves, sudden and unpredictable, hitting me at the most random moments, while making coffee in the morning, while folding laundry, while standing in line at the grocery store. It would creep up on me, uninvited, reminding me of the lies, the deceit, the sheer audacity of how effortlessly she had lived a double life right under my nose. And then, just as quickly, it would be gone, replaced by something else, exhaustion, numbness, the kind of fatigue that settles in when you've been carrying something too heavy for too long. For a while, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had spent so much time being someone's husband that I had forgotten what it meant to be just me. My identity had been so wrapped up in our relationship, in our routines, in the life we had built together, that when it all collapsed, I felt like I was standing in an empty space, unsure of what was supposed to come next. The nights were the worst. The silence felt oppressive, and even though I had told her to leave, even though I wanted her gone, the absence of her presence was something I hadn't been prepared for. It wasn't that I missed her, at least, not in the way I once had, but there was something unsettling about having to relearn how to exist in my own home without the constant reminder of her being there. But slowly, something inside me started to shift. I realized that as much as it hurt, as much as I hated what she had done, I was free. I was no longer living in the shadow of her lies, no longer waking up each day wondering why she felt so distant, no longer doubting myself every time she came home late or brushed off my questions with another excuse. She had been a storm in my life, one that I hadn't even known was brewing until it was too late, and now that it had passed, all that was left was the task of rebuilding. And that was exactly what I needed to do, rebuild. Not just my life, but my sense of self, my ability to trust, my ability to move forward without letting her betrayal define me. The first step was cutting her out completely. I blocked her number, deleted our old messages, removed her from social media. I wanted no part of her anymore, no lingering connections, no half-hearted attempts at closure. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, had made it clear that she had no real remorse, and I wasn't going to waste another second of my life waiting for her to feel the weight of what she had done. I contacted a lawyer, started the process of divorce, and made it clear that I wanted things done quickly, cleanly, with as little back and forth as possible. She could have whatever she wanted, our shared furniture, the apartment, the things we had bought together. None of it mattered to me anymore. I just wanted to be free. At first, I thought she would fight me on it, that she would at least attempt to salvage something, but she didn't. When the papers were sent over, she signed them without hesitation, without a single attempt to apologize or make amends. And in a way, that made it easier. It solidified what I already knew, that she had never been invested in this marriage the way I had, that she had been ready to move on long before I had even suspected anything was wrong. It hurt, of course it did, but it also gave me clarity. I wasn't losing something valuable. I was losing someone who had never truly valued me. Once the legal process was in motion, I focused on myself. I threw myself into work, into the friendships I had neglected, into hobbies that had once brought me joy but had been pushed aside in the years I had spent prioritizing my marriage. I started going to the gym, not as some desperate attempt to get back at her, but because I needed an outlet, needed to remind myself that I was still capable of taking care of myself, of being strong in a way that had nothing to do with her. I forced myself to go out, to be around people even when I didn't feel like it. And little by little, the world started feeling less heavy. There were still bad days, of course. There were still moments when I would catch myself thinking about the good times, about the version of her I had loved, about the life we had planned together before it had all gone to hell. But those moments became fewer, less intense, easier to push away. Because the truth was, I didn't want to hold onto that version of her anymore. She wasn't real. She had never been real. And I wasn't going to waste my time mourning someone who had never truly existed. The moment the divorce was finalized, I felt something lift inside me. It wasn't instant relief, wasn't some grand revelation that everything was suddenly perfect, but it was something. A step forward. A door closing that needed to be closed. I walked out of the lawyer's office that day knowing that I was no longer tied to her, that whatever future she had chosen for herself, it no longer had anything to do with me. And that was enough. I had spent months drowning in her betrayal, in the pain of what she had done, in the confusion of trying to make sense of how someone I had trusted so completely could have been so cruel. But now, standing on the other side of it, I realized that I wasn't broken. I wasn't ruined. I wasn't some tragic figure whose life had been derailed beyond repair. I was still here. I was still me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I wasn't sure what the future looked like, wasn't sure when I would be ready to trust again, to open myself up to the possibility of love after everything I had been through. But I knew one thing, I would never settle for anything less than what I deserved again. I had spent too long giving my time, my trust, my love to someone who had taken it all for granted. And if there was one thing I had learned through all of this, it was that I would never make that mistake again. So I moved forward. One day at a time. And with each step I left a little more of her behind. Looking back now, I see the entire experience for what it was, a lesson, a brutal one, but a lesson nonetheless. For months I let myself be consumed by the betrayal, by the rage, by the sheer unfairness of it all. I kept wondering how someone I had loved, someone I had trusted with every part of me, could do something so heartless, so deliberate. But the truth is, there was never going to be an answer that made it make sense. Some people are just wired that way, selfish, entitled, incapable of true loyalty. And trying to figure out why she did it, why she thought it was okay to walk all over me, why she had been so completely indifferent to the pain she caused, was just another way of holding onto something that no longer existed. There was no deeper meaning to her betrayal. There was no grand revelation to be found in the wreckage of our marriage. She cheated because she wanted to. She lied because it was easy. And she left because she had already decided that I wasn't enough a long time ago. That's it. That's all there ever was to it. At first, I thought I needed closure. I thought I needed her to feel some kind of remorse, to admit that she had made a mistake, to give me something, anything that would make it easier to move on. But time has a way of shifting perspectives, of peeling back layers of pain and revealing the truth underneath. And the truth is, I never needed her closure. I never needed her apology. What would it have even meant coming from someone like her? A woman who had stood in front of me, caught red-handed, and still had the audacity to act like I was the problem? A woman who had laughed when I confronted her, who had shown no shame, no regret, no concern for the damage she had done? No, an apology wouldn't have mattered. It would have been just another lie, another manipulation, another attempt to rewrite the narrative so that she didn't have to be the villain in her own story. And I was done giving her space in my head. I was done letting her betrayal define me. The real closure came when I realized that I was better off without her. It wasn't an instant realization, not some grand moment of clarity where everything suddenly felt okay. It was gradual, built up over time, piece by piece, as I started putting myself back together. It came in the form of small victories. The first morning I woke up and didn't think about her, the first time I laughed and it wasn't forced, the first time I looked in the mirror and didn't see a man who had been broken by someone else's choices. It came in the form of rediscovering who I was outside of that marriage, of remembering the things that made me happy, of finding joy in the freedom of not having to answer to someone who never truly valued me. It came when I finally understood that I hadn't lost anything worth keeping. She wasn't the prize. She wasn't some great love that slipped through my fingers. She was a liar, a cheat, a woman who had no idea what it meant to love someone fully. And that wasn't my loss. That was hers. If there's one thing I would tell anyone going through something similar, it's this: do not waste your time trying to make sense of someone else's selfishness. Do not sit there dissecting every moment, every conversation, every sign you might have missed, thinking that if you just figure it out, it will hurt less. It won't. You could spend a lifetime trying to understand why someone who once claimed to love you could betray you in the worst way, and it still wouldn't make a difference. Some people are just wired differently. Some people will take everything you give and still want more. And that has nothing to do with you. You are not responsible for someone else's inability to be faithful, to be kind, to be honest. You are not at fault for their choices. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start focusing on the one thing that actually matters you. I won't pretend that I have everything figured out now, that I walked away from this completely unscathed. Betrayal leaves scars, no matter how strong you are. It changes you, makes you see the world differently, makes you question things you never used to. But it doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to be the thing that holds you back. If anything, I've come to see it as a gift, a painful, undeserved, unwanted gift, but a gift nonetheless. Because it forced me to wake up. It forced me to see people for who they truly are, to stop making excuses for red flags, to trust myself in a way I never had before. It made me realize that I deserve more, that I will never again settle for a love that makes me feel like I have to prove my worth, like I have to constantly fight for someone's attention and loyalty. Love isn't supposed to be a battlefield where you're constantly competing with someone's worst instincts. Love should be simple. Love should be honest. Love should be a choice that is made every single day without hesitation, without second thoughts, without the need for secrets. And someday I'll find that again. I don't know when. I don't know how. But I know that when I do, I'll be ready. I'll be stronger. I'll be wiser. And I won't be carrying the weight of this betrayal with me. Because this chapter of my life is over. She is over. And I refuse to let her mistakes define my future. I am moving forward one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I know that I am going to be okay.